If you pointed that thing at me, I'd let you shoot me in the hand and I'd fucking kill you.
More leverage, so I'm thinking like a machete.
Yeah, but
Something
you know what?
hack.
No, you want a samurai sword. She's right. Daryl's crossbow is a secret name. It's called piece of shit.
So recently, Joe Rogan came out with a podcast, this time with Collier Noir. This came out April 17th, 2021. It was episode 1636. If you guys want to find that for yourself, it is on Spotify. And in the podcast, they touched on a lot of issues, namely cars, guns, and to a lesser degree, TV shows. Collier Noir, if you know him, is a big gun advocate. He dabbles in the both political realm of gun control and things like that, and he also just likes to shoot guns and makes videos about guns, and to a lesser degree about cars as well. But near the end of the episode, they start talking about TV shows, namely The Walking Dead. They also talk a little bit about Vikings, but I'm going to focus mostly on Walking Dead for this episode. Now you may be wondering, why is a History Channel looking at Joe Rogan and Collier Noir talking about The Walking Dead? Well, the answer is that they have a bit of a weapons debate on the podcast.
Yeah, what do you think is a good thing to have besides a gun?
So the big thing that they talk about at first is the issue with Daryl's crossbow. I'll play the clip here.
I always say a crossbow is just a shitty gun. Like people say, oh, I'm into archery, I'm a bowman. Like that was in the movie. That got me angry when I was watching Walking Dead. Oh, you're a bowman. Bitch, you ain't a bowman.
That used to piss me
That's
off.
a shitty gun.
You're running around the zombie apocalypse with a fucking bow.
Yeah, not only that,
No, crossbow, that's what I'm talking about.
It's
Yeah,
hard to
crossbow,
reload.
yeah.
Like when you reload a crossbow, you got to put it on the ground, you put your feet on it. There's a thing at the bottom of a crossbow, especially a high-powered crossbow. You put your feet in this thing, and then you pull on this motherfucker because it's like 100 pounds of pressure. And then you lock it in place, and then you put the bolt. It takes forever. It takes so long. If zombies are coming at you.
That's what I was saying.
As you can tell from that, Joe Rogan is not a very big fan of the idea of the crossbow and the specific configuration that Daryl has as well. Rogan brings up two of the big issues he sees. One is that the crossbow is hard to reload. He of course calls it a quote-unquote shitty gun rather than a longbow, which you can fire much faster. Crossbows are much more powerful than normal bows, but they're significantly slower to reload. On top of that, you see this part here.
Who's fletching his fucking arrows, and why does he have field tips on? This is what drives me crazy. He's got field tips. He doesn't even have a fucking broadhead on that piece of shit. This is nonsense. If you pointed that thing at me, I'd let you shoot me in the hand and I'd fucking kill you. It'll take you so long to reload that, and I'll kill you with my other hand. Fuck you with that stupid bow. Daryl's crossbow is a secret name. It's called piece of shit. Fucking field tips. Why don't you have broadheads?
Every time I would see him with the crossbow, I would just shout, "We don't believe you."
Where Joe Rogan is going off about the stupidity of having field heads versus broadheads on the arrows that Daryl shoots. For those who don't know, field heads, you can kind of see it in this clip here. If you ever have been shooting bows and arrows, that's probably what you've been shooting, namely at targets. Broadheads have a larger metal point that's actually made for hunting. Although historically, crossbows didn't use broadheads, but they did have a very heavy sort of bolt. You can see here the bolts were significantly thicker than most arrows we see today, and it has a very heavy solid steel head. So while it's not a broadhead per se, it is still a very effective weapon. Obviously, broadheads would be easier to get than historically accurate crossbow bolts, but nonetheless, I think Rogan does have a good point here that field heads probably wouldn't do much with zombie apocalypses, especially if most of the brain is already destroyed. It's not going to really help to put a tiny little hole in the brain, since you don't have the cavitation you get with a gun, and of course it's way too small compared to other arrows to be effective. The topic got a bit more interesting though when they moved on to the topic of swords. As you may know, in The Walking Dead, Michonne, who is one of the big characters of the show, uses a katana or some other type of samurai sword. I'm going to assume it's a katana. I'm not an expert on Japanese swords. I know that there are other types, wakizashi, no dashi, all that. But it looks like a katana, and given that it is, of course, a mainstream show, I'm going to assume it is a katana. Here they actually debate a little bit of what would be a good cutting weapon for the zombie apocalypse.
Besides a gun?
The lady with the samurai sword, that's the shit.
Yes,
yeah,
something
you just
edge
gotta
weapon.
cut their heads off.
Just give me, but see, I need something that give me more leverage, so I'm thinking like a machete.
Yeah, but
something
you know what?
hack.
No, you want a samurai sword. She's right.
As you saw there, Joe Rogan advocates for the katana, while Colio Noir advocates for a machete. As for which one is probably better, I would definitely say the katana, and Joe Rogan obviously outlines that.
Because first of all, samurai sword, you can two-hand it. That's what you want. You want something you two-hand because you can use technique.
You really
and it won't wear you out as much.
Okay.
And two, you want something that's going to really slice through shit. A machete, I mean, you're not going to get off people's heads with a machete.
Yeah, but are you going to be able to keep the edge on a fucking samurai sword?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, the steel is insane.
Okay.
I mean, it's like such a well-crafted steel.
He's a little wrong about a couple things. For example, he says when you can use two hands, which is a very good argument. He says it's for technique reasons, which isn't really correct. Obviously, the proper technique with a katana is with two hands, but that doesn't mean one-handed swords don't have technique. Also, there is actually technique with machetes. It's not nearly as ornate or cool looking as a katana, but it still exists. Also, you probably wouldn't be using that much technique against zombies. That's more so for other people with the sword, but nonetheless, that's a little bit of a point. The bigger point he makes is that with the two hands, it's less tiring, which is of course true. If you have two hands, you will tire at about half the rate as if you have one hand on the weapon. Furthermore, you actually have more power, which again, probably not a big concern with zombies, but nonetheless, it can help. And of course, they do fight other people in the series, and that's where you sort of see the sword come into play. Rogan also mentions the misnomer about the katana having super duper steel and a super sharp edge. Obviously, to some degree, this is kind of true. The way that the steel is created for katanas historically is quite impressive. And of course, the blades were quite sharp, namely because the swords had a very sharp edge, because it was made out of a very hard metal. However, the reason that the katana was built the way it was, for those who don't know, it's a type of layering of the steel over and over again. And then you actually have two types of steels in the blade. It has a softer core, which can bend a bit more, and a harder edge, which allows it to be sharper to cut. The reason this was done wasn't because the technique was super effective. It, of course, actually took a very, very, very long time to do, and it was not very efficient. The reason they did it is because the type of steel that they had in Japan and their steel deposits were very bad. And in order to actually make the steel usable, in many cases, they had to do this type of thing. In Europe, for example, they had perfectly good steel deposits, and they didn't have this folding technique in quite the same way. There are obviously more to the folding. There's a hamon line, which has to do with layering the blade with clay, and the tamahagani steel production. I won't get into that. I don't know too much about Japanese steel, but I do know that there is a misconception that it's the best steel ever. That's not really true. And of course, Michonne wouldn't be using a historical katana. She would be using one made in more modern times, which almost certainly wouldn't have that same folding technique for it. I haven't watched the show, so maybe it does mention somewhere where the sword is from, but if she bought it in America, it almost certainly is just made out of normal steel like any other sword that you would probably see today. Of course, when it comes to this debate of machete versus katana that the two were having, ultimately length is going to be the winner, especially with zombies. If you don't want them to touch you, the farther away they are from you, the better. So katana wouldn't be the best weapon, but it would be a lot better than the machete. Which does beg the question, What is the best handheld weapon for a zombie apocalypse? That's a whole different video, but I can go into it a little bit. Obviously, if it's a handheld weapon, you're probably gonna want length over everything, so a spear would be pretty good. That being said, if you're dealing with a horde of zombies, spears are kind of hard to deal with a horde because you have to stab one zombie and then pull it out and then stab another zombie. It's not a fast weapon particularly, so you might want a sword. A European longsword would probably work better than a katana. Again, just because it is longer, it is also double-bladed, so while it may not actually keep the edge quite as well as a katana, and it may be a little harder to cut with marginally, just in terms of skill because of the shape of the blade, having two edges would actually help probably, especially for swinging back and forth wildly and you don't actually know how to use a sword. Colion Noir also brings up the idea of using an axe.
Or I'd go an axe.
An axe? No.
I've been on some Viking shit lately, so you gotta...
I don't think that would be a good idea. It has the same issue of the spear in that it's not particularly fast. It's powerful to be sure, but again, if you're dealing with zombies, you just kind of need the minimum amount of power to actually incapacitate or kill the zombie. You don't need to cut 5 zombies at once. You probably couldn't with an axe anyway because they are too short to begin with. The podcast starts to close out with the idea of history repeating, which is totally divorced from these ideas of what weapon is the best for a zombie apocalypse. But I just thought it was a nice touch. Of course, Colion Noir is a big Second Amendment advocate, and he points to the totalitarian regimes in history that have disarmed their people, and he actually feels that the reason for the Second Amendment is to defend against the government, and that we are actually not past the point of totalitarianism. It can always come back. So that's it for this video, guys. Have a great day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more content.